So this season on the Climate Alarm Clock, we're profiling different environmental organisations to find out what they do and how you can get involved. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Padraic Fogarty from the Irish Wildlife Trust. Padraic, it's great to have you with us here today.
Hi there, Darragh.
So Padraic, I suppose if you could just start off by telling us who the Irish Wildlife Trust are and what you do.
So the Irish Wildlife Trust is a non-governmental charitable organisation. We were founded in 1979, and so we've been around for quite a long time. And our mission, I suppose, is to raise awareness about wildlife and the importance of nature to people. Of course, we call it biodiversity now. We weren't using that word so much in the past, but basically that's what we do. For years we talked about protecting nature and species and wildlife, and people kind of thought it was a hobby, that it was something for bird watchers, and not something particularly important. I think using the word biodiversity now, it does give it a bit more weight, and it makes it a more serious topic, which of course it absolutely needs to be.
And so when you talk about the Irish Wildlife Trust and having that role in biodiversity and protecting nature, what does that look like? What does the work that you do involve?
So we do a number of things. We have some branches around the country. So there are people out there doing, outreach at a very local level, doing walks and talks. We produce a quarterly magazine that our members get. We do a lot of public awareness information, particularly through social media. We are heavily involved in marine protected areas. We're involved in a project to promote that. And it was in wider campaign kind of issues, which is more my role within the organization. We're basically trying to raise the profile of the biodiversity emergency, but obviously much more than that. We're trying to get people to, and the government in particular, to do something about it.
Okay, so when you mention a biodiversity emergency there, if I've never heard that term before, what does that mean?
Basically, it's referring to the collapse of natural ecosystems, the mass extinction of life on Earth, the fact that we have pretty much erased natural systems and nature from huge parts of the world, and Ireland included. And the emergency part of it is really, I mean, obviously it's a disaster for all the plants and animals that are going extinct, but it's also a disaster for us because we simply cannot live on a planet while there's an extinction crisis going on, while there's a mass extinction event. Humans are very much part of nature, and so we can't divorce ourselves from that crisis.
What does that biodiversity emergency look like in Ireland?
Yeah, that's a good question, because people will tend to drive across Ireland and we see green fields and cows happily eating grass, and we go out and we look at the sea and everything looks pretty normal. And a lot of people ask, well, what crisis? But our eyes are fooling us because we don't see all the life that simply isn't there anymore. One way of thinking about it is that Ireland is naturally a very densely forested country, but our forest effectively is gone. There's barely 1% of our country is covered in natural forest, and yet we look at what's happening in, let's say, the Amazon or in Southeast Asia, and we're completely horrified at the destruction of our forest, but we don't really realize that we have done that to our country perhaps more than any other country in the world.
Yeah, yeah. So in dealing with these crises, then the work of the Irish Wildlife Trust, what kind of campaigns do you have ongoing at the moment that are trying to address some of these issues?
So we work closely with other NGOs in this area. So I would emphasize that, because we don't do anything on our own. We everything is a team effort. But we are trying to draw attention to really what we consider to be the main pressures on biodiversity and natural systems in Ireland. So one of those would be the sea, for instance. I mean, we often forget that we live on an island surrounded in an enormous ocean, and the ocean really is in bad health. And so overfishing, which continues, is one of our priorities. Creating marine protected areas is also one of our priorities. And then on land, 70% of Ireland is farmed. So farming is by default going to be, the biggest driver of pollution and extinction loss. So changing our farming system is a priority. But then there's also the areas that are not farmed, such as our peatlands that I just mentioned, which are in a dreadful state, and our river systems, which are all pretty much damaged or polluted in some way or another. But ultimately, this comes back to the point about natural ecosystems. And maybe this is a phrase that isn't widely understood. But natural ecosystems are basically able to self-regulate, and they're able to adapt to changes. And in Ireland, we don't have natural ecosystems. We basically destroyed them all. So one of the priorities for us is to, I suppose, A, to get people to understand what that means and why it's a problem, but B, to what are the practical things that we need to do on the ground to restore natural ecosystems and to bring that resilience and health back to our country? You may have heard the term rewilding, and rewilding, I think, is a very exciting and hopeful concept. But the principle of rewilding is about letting nature basically restore itself. So people will realize or have noticed if they go away for 2 weeks and they come back, their grass, their garden looks a bit like a jungle. And basically, if they never cut the grass, most gardens would turn into a forest at some stage. And that applies to our land. And so restoring natural systems really is about stepping back, giving nature a bit of space, a bit of time. It doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing, because in Ireland we have invasive species. We may have drained the land to such a point that those drains need to be blocked. And I'm thinking in particular about peatlands. But in a lot of cases, particularly in the sea, all we really have to do is nothing. We just have to pull back and stop destroying it. And nature, well, we have to hope nature will rebound. But I mean, the evidence suggests that nature has a lot of restorative powers. And the advantage to us from having natural systems is manifold. It is our food security. It is our water supply. It is a buffer against extreme weather events. Natural systems tend to store carbon. So if you have healthy forests or healthy peatlands, they're taking carbon out of the air. And it's wonderful for our own physical and mental health, which often gets overlooked. But living in a healthy environment where you have good access to outdoors and healthy outdoor spaces, and not traffic clogged pollution streets or damaged ecosystems, has enormous benefits for people.
So if our listeners have liked what they've heard, Padraic, and they want to get involved with the Irish Wildlife Trust, what can they do? How can they get involved?
So the best thing you can do is become a member of the Irish Wildlife Trust. We rely on donations and individual memberships to keep us going. So go on to iwt.ie and join up. It's a relatively small fee, and you get our magazine and you get to participate in our events. We try to keep most of our events free so that they're accessible, and also we're on social media to follow us what we're doing. They're the best ways to get involved with our work.
Great stuff. And if people just want to maybe change their mindset a bit, live in a more nature-friendly way and reconnect with nature, have you any tips on what the first steps in doing that would be?
Yes, the first step is always doing nothing and observing and trying to look around wherever it is you live. Try to just look around you and engage with what you see. And what do you see? Do you see places for nature, or do you see, highly manicured gardens and landscapes and farms where there's no space for nature? And then I think once you see that, then you start to realize not only the trouble we're in, but also that, there are things that we can do about it. And even if you live in an apartment with just a window box, the smallest spaces where you can allow nature to thrive are of value. Really, a lot of the changes are in our own attitudes and our own approach. I do think that with all the bad news that we get these days, it's very easy to be despondent and despairing, but we have to remind ourselves that there's an awful lot that we can't do, or that we can do, and that we can't resign ourselves to despair and doomerism. We really just have to get on with it as soon as possible.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Padraic, thanks a million for that. I'm sure, or I'm hoping, our listeners found that as engaging and thought provoking as I did, and are signing up to the Irish Wildlife Trust. That was Padraic Fogarty from the Irish Wildlife Trust, and that's it for this week's episode of the Climate Alarm Clock. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Climate Alarm Clock, and on Twitter at The Climate Alarm. If you did enjoy the podcast, make sure to give us a review wherever you listen, and do just share the podcast with a friend. We'll be back next week with our usual mix of features and news. Until then, goodbye.